All right, everybody. Happy Friday. It's the first Friday in February, Friday, February 2nd, and you are live on Shally's Alley. Once again, I am demoted from flight duty. I don't have my flight background yet and still working on getting a machine that can handle that kind of processing power. Believe it or not, for those of you that know me to be very technical, I'm actually on a 10-year-old computer right now, which is, well, let's just say really embarrassing. Hence the lack of rendered backgrounds. But I can still do a live video and I can still talk to you and I can still have really special, cool guests. Like my guest this week, Paul Abrahms. Paul and I go way, way back. I think we met at a conference in Chicago like 20 years ago or something like that. Do you even remember that, Paul? What was that?
I think actually it was a conference in Atlanta, and
Oh, in
we
Atlanta.
actually was out
Okay.
of town because I you gave me a ride to the airport, but it was a recruiting sourcing conference, and we kind of connected, and um, I was attracted to your experience in sourcing and best practices around that, and I remember bringing you to Chicago for a learning lab with Star Chicago, and you gave a couple of presentations in the suburbs in Chicago about how to find talent. So I think that's where it all started.
Yeah, it all started in Atlanta. I totally, yeah. If I had not remembered that one, but I remember the Chicago. That was a fun trip. We went to that pizza place that had the deep dish pizza that you said was
Right.
like the original deep dish pizza. What was
Lou
it called?
Malnati's. Lou Malnati's.
Lou Malnati's, yeah, with the
Yeah.
yellow kind of yellowish dough, and you're like, don't order a full pizza because you can't eat the whole thing. And I'm like, come on, I
Right.
can. And then
Right.
I barely had one slice, and I was totally full. That was
You did the
great.
trick.
Yeah. Well, so let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we kind of get things going here. So Paul is essentially is a recruiting talent acquisition leader and an expert in the industry, and who works for a company called Huron, and they are a consulting firm. It's a global consulting organization, and when you think consultants, this is this is what they do, right? You typically think about consultants that come in and do um, audits, and they do planning and strategy and all that. That's what they do. And Paul's been there for actually most of the time that I've known you. You've been there for almost 13 years. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Just finished my 13th year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Long
We
time.
um we actually we do a lot of work in the healthcare industry, the higher ed market, and then really um, any commercial industry around process improvement, technology, strategy, growth and innovation, and a lot of stuff in technology. So most of my background's been in technology recruiting since I started in executive search, and have worked for some of the larger brands and then smaller emerging companies, and have been able to deploy that at Huron, which is about $1 billion company and growing to 2 billion. And anyway, that's my
Which
background.
is for consulting. That's a lot. Now, I oops, I put your I can let me cut that other part of the beginning. We don't need that. I put your LinkedIn profile up here so people can connect with you, and I included the HTTP, which I don't usually do. Um, but so you said something I did not know about this, even though we've known each other for a long time. You said you started in executive search. So how did you actually get into executive search? Was your first job in talent acquisition?
Right, right.
And how'd you get
Yeah.
into that? I mean, that's a pretty decent job to be a starting job.
Well, I actually started in sales. I was in the insurance business back in Ohio. And then when I moved to Chicago, I had some friends that were in recruiting, and started having some conversations, and um, was interested in technology, and ended up going to a retained firm that was doing search work with corporate organizations and consulting around technology positions. So we were either building out a IT organization from the top down, or doing work for some of the big eight firms at the time. And I started as a junior recruiter and kind of worked my way up. And then when consulting started to take off in the early 90s, I pivoted to PeopleSoft's first business partner, a boutique firm out of San Francisco that was looking for a recruiter. And they liked the fact that I knew executive search. So it's kind of learning how consulting firms operate, and did that for um, about 4 or 5 years, and then pivoted into larger organizations. I went to Deloitte and ran recruiting in the central region for them. and along the way have been both in and outside of search, as well as in and outside of like corporate environments. And so when I landed at Huron, it was kind of a blend of different types of experiences I had around technology, consulting, and even the corporate roles and product development and things like that.
So it's a very broad background in different types of recruiting in different fields. You were even in banking, I think, for a short while, and for J.P. Morgan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was with Bank One, and then they got bought by J.P. Morgan, so I kind of went through that transition, and that was the time that insourcing was in. The economy was weak, and Jamie Dimon had come in and decided to eliminate the consultants, and they wanted to hire 3,000 people in a year. And I was fortunately hired as one of the
Wow.
recruiters on a 20-person team to help build out the technology organization for them. So got to use my tech skills, but also understand how a bank runs, and worked across the organization both on the business side, and then pulled me into some of the executive search roles that they had going. So it was a great experience that I was able to leverage that experience as I've gone on to other roles.
So you were in Ohio, Indiana, and then now you're in Illinois. And one of the things that you're very passionate about, and you talk a lot about, and we've discussed in the past, and actually part of the reason that you brought me out to start Chicago, is to essentially improve the whole TA process. And you mentioned that you wanted to talk about what makes a good recruiter, or I should say, what makes a recruiter a good recruiter. So, do you want to start there?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think most people get into recruiting because they're interested, they're curious, they want to help others, and I guess that's kind of how I got into it too. Just the one-on-one relationship building that you get is really great, and then the opportunity to really learn about business. And so I think really good recruiters are inquisitive. They want to learn, they want to understand what people do, and then how does it play to the environments they represent. So I find that really good recruiters either have that intellectual curiosity, and that's really required when you're navigating, when you think of the whole search for process, from really understanding what the requirements are, what the market is, available pool of talent, how you're going to go find it, really understanding what your business is about, how do you represent that, and then really having a capability and understanding of understanding the human dynamic, because it's less about the job that I have that I'm trying to fill. It's more about really understanding what your client or hiring managers are looking for, but then how do you transfer that into a relationship with someone that's not looking for a job, get them excited about the opportunity, be able to differentiate it, and then the whole part of orchestrating the process on the back end. So when the candidate comes in the door, you're able to differentiate your brand, you're able to make it a seamless process for the candidate, prep them each way, through the process and the workflows, and then also coach, your hiring managers on what the candidate's capabilities are, and really be that facilitator to make the magic happen.
Facilitator. Okay, so let me try to pull out a couple of things from there. So, um, I'm sensing some bullet points on what makes a good recruiter. There's a drive, there's a curiosity, and that's evident when recruiters ask why and how, and kind of get to the bottom rather than just sort of take orders, right? So we've known for a long time that order taking is not a good
Right.
business skill in
Right.
general. But in recruiting in particular, it's going beyond the just what's on in black and white, right, on paper, right? So that's one. Then you mentioned a little bit, and I want to get into this, more knowledge about HR and people and organizations. But there's a counterpoint to that in the industry, and I want to see how you feel about this. A lot of recruiters feel like they're not HR. In other words, like they sometimes even take offense, like, "Oh, I'm not an HR. I'm a recruiter. HR is completely different." Um, I've I learned a long time ago. So I've been doing this for a long time, right? I've been doing this for more than 20 years. You've been doing it longer than I have. And many years ago, when I was at larger organizations, I realized that recruiting is definitely part of HR. It's just a different specialty. just like in other professions, there's specializations, but it definitely is part of HR because it is dealing with the people, and it's more importantly, it's dealing with external talent necessarily, and that's an area that HR generally doesn't deal with. Most of HR is internal. Some of it is external, and recruiting, a lot more of it is external, but it's still part of it. What's your reaction or your response to recruiters that say, "I'm not HR. That's not. I don't want to be part of HR."
Right. Well, I think historically people think of HR as like policy procedures, the police, um, to monitor best behaviors and that kind of thing. And there's a component of employee relations to making sure that you manage risk for the organization. So my sense is that the more that I've worked within organizations, the more I realize that the HR team, which includes the compensation team, the HR business partners that are interfacing with the business leaders, and um, the total rewards team. If you don't really fit into that and you think that you're a separate function, you're really all integrated. So when we go to solve a problem for a client, it's really understanding, where's the business going? What do we need to make happen? There's a lot of challenges from the standpoint of the war for talent where you need to be competitive in the marketplace. So if you're viewing yourself as like an island, it's really hard to navigate within a corporate environment. And so, when I started in search, it's true. I thought that, the HR people were a roadblock because I thought I was competing against them. And
Hmm.
my view
Yeah,
for, a really strong internal TA team is that you really partner with the HR team, and they're actually needed to help you get your job done and more efficiently. If you get a new role and it's priced too low for the market, recruiters have good insights
that's
around what's
where
going on in
you.
the marketplace.
Yep.
So they need us as much as we need them. So it's really more of a holistic thing. And I think the role of the recruiter has changed where, when I started, it was probably more just get the jobs done, just fill the
Fill
position.
the jobs. Fill the jobs. Right.
Yeah, and now it requires there's more complication, and it's really like a team environment. At Huron, we call our HR team kind of the village, and we come together to solve problems. And so, not my role is around running a talent acquisition team, but I also think it's about being a brand ambassador for my company, helping onboard new leaders in the organization, help them figure out what the strategy is to identify the right people for the role. So there's a lot of components to it, which actually makes it really interesting and challenging and fun because you actually learn about the business of running your business more than just being someone that knows how to recruit talent.
That's right, and that is actually so. You remember the nonprofit organization that I ran where we would get people trained in sourcing and get them corporate jobs. You remember that, the Sourcing Institute
Yeah.
Foundation?
Yep.
So one of the things that we frequently spoke about when talking to individuals that were interested in going into recruiting, because they would ask, why recruiting, right? Why, I used to be a printer, why go into recruiting? And one of the biggest reasons is that I would explain, in recruiting you have a unique centralized position that allows you to view into all parts of the organization. If you're at a company long enough, as a recruiter, you get to see procurement and risk and accounting and finance and marketing and sales, and maybe not if you're one of 500 recruiters and it's a very large organization, but if you're one of 4 or one of 12, or you will see so much about what happens behind the closed doors in board meetings. You'll see about strategy, you'll learn about all these different aspects of a business, down to when I was at Coca-Cola, I learned about manufacturing and environmental
Right.
impact of
Right.
production, and I would never learn that from. There's not any other job that I can think of where you have that much exposure into the entire organization. So I think that holistic view, having the
Yeah.
view and also learning it.
I agree. And, you're also learning about a lot from your candidates. So the more you specialize in a particular area, you learn about, if it's in the tech space, what does an architect do? What does a, web developer do? And it's more about not the technology, but what they're actually creating for clients and businesses in different industries. And it's more about it's like getting an MBA of, whatever, area you're focusing in, which
Right.
um,
That's a
your
really good way to
portfolio is.
look at it.
Yeah, and
It's like
so
an
that's the thing
MBA,
that I think.
a,
Yeah,
a,
it's
a a
awesome.
real life crash course on the
Yeah.
job MBA, probably even better than most MBAs, really, because you're getting exposure to the way things really happen, and you see the exceptions to the rules and the reaction to things that happen. So all right, so we got curiosity, getting to the bottom of it. We got this holistic view of really, you really are, at least in corporate. Maybe when you're in a search firm or an RPO, it's much more difficult to do this. But when you're inside in a corporation and you're, an in-house recruiter, having a knowledge of the different components of HR, even though you may not want to be in payroll and benefits, but being able to go to those people and ask questions, and that connectivity is important. So you got curiosity, you got the knowledge of HR and the whole organization. And also I think you sort of touched on this, but also you would be able to protect the company from risk by having knowledge of some of these areas, right? And also be able to align with corporate strategy, which I think sometimes gets passed over by recruiters who tend to lean towards the more tactical, let's fill the job. It's not answering the bigger question. I'll just give you an example. If a recruiter is not aware of the overarching strategy of the company, and they have two jobs that they have to fill, both jobs are always going to be the most important job, right? If you ask the hiring manager, is your job really important? Of course, they're going to say yes. If you go to your boss, hey, which of these two jobs do I need to work on first? Your boss is going to say, you got to work on both. Everybody's going to tell you got to work on both. Well, now extend that to 40 jobs. You have 40 jobs. Well, you don't have time to spend, on all 40 jobs. So you have to prioritize. How do you prioritize? Number one way to prioritize is to work on the jobs that are most critical to the business and have the most impact or the most alignment to strategic objectives. So if you know what those are, then you have no problem prioritizing your jobs. But if you don't know what those are, it gets really difficult. So we got that as the third one. And then you touched on this. I want to expand on it. Focus on the candidate's needs as opposed to focus on what. So
Well,
take
oftentimes
us
you
there.
lead with, excuse me, you lead with, I get choked up when I talk about this stuff.
Yeah, right. You really feel it.
Yeah. It's like in sales, like if we're approaching someone that is looking for a job, that's easy. They've done some homework on us and they know what they're looking for. But oftentimes we're asked to find candidates that aren't looking. We're looking for a passive candidate. So there's a whole life cycle of what it takes to build that trust and relationship. So first you have to do the research to understand what's the pool of talent you're going to go get. Secondly, you have to figure out how you're going to get them to bite and get interested. And then you have to bring them in the door and kind of orchestrate that. So there's a skill set and capability around how do you navigate that that's really critical, and it's very similar to sales. There's a guy by the name of Chris Little who I got to know years ago, and he wrote a book called The Accidental Salesperson, and he has a methodology. It's probably baked into a lot of sales methodologies, but there's basically 5 steps to a relationship, and it starts with first making that introduction. And what is it that your prospect is going to need to hear in order to trust you, to want to engage with you. And so when I think of a successful recruiter, just getting the conversation back to that, I think of really effective recruiters are able to understand what the candidate or prospect is thinking and build confidence and trust and credibility that it's worthwhile spending time with me, and then understanding your value proposition and what differentiates you to get them in the door to have those conversations to begin the process of recruiting. And then all the touch points that are important around, prepping the candidate, prepping the hiring team, making sure that, like, if you know all the things that could derail or go wrong in their interview process, and you kind of manage that into your workflows, then you're going to have a more successful outcome rather than getting to the end of the process where you didn't do the right thing at the front end, or give clarity around the expectations of the role. And then the other person I would call out, who's always been my hero, is a guy named Lou Adler. And Lou's been around forever, talking about what motivates a candidate to want to move forward. And he always talks about you need to have a 30% delta between where you are and where you're going to go, and that could be in money, financial reward, or it could be an opportunity, or the opportunity to learn, grow, develop, and work with good people. And that conversation, really good recruiters have at the front end of the process to hook candidates and getting interested if it's a good match. And then also, being transparent, and if it's not a good match, not pushing people through the process, because, again, it really comes to meeting the candidate where they are, and you got to ensure that you really understand what their needs are, whether they're motivating factors, would they be a good cultural fit for the organization, and kind of be that filter. And I think really effective recruiters do that really well.
So, in other words, let me rephrase this a little bit. Filling the job is important, but filling the job with the wrong person, and you're not necessarily doing that on purpose. You're just filling the job, and you're not focusing on the best possible hire. What you're saying essentially is a successful hire doesn't mean the outcome of I filled the job, right? That is not successful. That is getting the job done of filling the job, but a successful hire, as you're defining it, is bringing somebody on board that is not going to be leaving soon. That's not going to be leaving in 90 days, right?
Exactly. Quality,
Um,
focus on the right things.
yeah, and they have potential for advancement and all that. Even if there are times when the organization has a 2-year plan. We need to hire this person to do something that's going to get done in 2 years. But still, what are they going to do after that 2 years? And bring somebody in that fits with the culture and all that. So successful hires more than just fill job. I get that. So now we have 5. We have the curiosity, we have knowledge of HR on the organization, we have focusing on the candidate's needs, and then we have focusing on the business needs to make sure that the hire is a good match and is not just the best available at the time. But there's one more, I think, right? And I would say that has to do with um, the drive. You called it being self-motivated. Tell me more a little bit more about that. It's, to me, it's kind of some people call it grit or
Right.
perseverance or
Right.
whatnot. So how is that different for recruiting than for other jobs that do also require it?
Well, the biggest challenge, I think, is that you've got a lot of priorities. So if you're not, fast growing organization, you've got a lot on your plate, you got to get organized, and the challenge is that, every like transaction or relationship you have with a candidate it may feel like a transaction for you because you have 40 jobs you have to fill and you have to get them filled efficiently. But from a candidate's perspective, this is the biggest decision they're making in their life, at the time. So you have to be sensitive to that and understand that. And then you do all the magic, and then for some reason the deal falls through. The candidate has another opportunity, or they get a counter offer, or something like that. And to me, grit is just realizing that
changes.
Yeah, it's not going to always happen the way you think it will, or maybe the business changes and we thought we had an opportunity, and for some reason we don't have it. And the good recruiters navigate from it. They don't take it personally. They just kind of persevere. And then the other thing that I think has helped me along the way is it's always that effort of just one more. So if I'm ending my day, I always do, well, let's make one more call. And, or I feel like I'm blocked, well, maybe I should do this and try this avenue. And so it's the good recruiters just don't give up. They have a desire to win, and they just lean in as much as it takes. And sometimes there's a sacrifice to that. And, the challenge we have today is, you want to have work-life balance, and you want to be home for your families and have a life. And then the pressure of trying to deliver and win. It's always been a personal challenge for me to how do I manage that, because it's the type of profession that can suck you in and you keep going and going because you're never done. And but the recruiters kind of have become successful, realize when they need to turn it on and focus and lean in and have that grit, not give up, and then balance it with don't take it too seriously. We're not building rocket ships. But if you're working for an aerospace company, you are.
Yeah,
you
right.
are.
Unless you're working at Lockheed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean by having the grit.
So there's a little bit of me that thinks maybe that's kind of like lightheartedness. Go with the roll. You go with the punches, that kind of thing, as well as grit, right? So like gritting your teeth and just bearing through it in a stoic way may not necessarily be the best. It's good to have that perseverance, but it's also good to have the thicker skin where you just, it is what it is. It's life. Candidate had something change in their life that it's not me. I didn't mess up the hire. The company didn't mess up the hire. It just was the situation. So yeah, I like that.
One other comment that comes from that is that, like there are ways you can shortcut and be more successful. Like there's the one thing that I go back to when I'm trying to solve a problem of how to fill a position. The first thing that is helpful to understand, what does historical success look like? So if you're given 20 positions to fill, and you know that typically 40% of them are coming from employee referrals, 25% are coming from job postings, and 15 or 20% are coming from direct sourcing. What you may really have to do is just figure out, how do you break it into the job families, and where do you think you can get your talent from?
Which
And
jobs?
focus on
Yeah.
focus on the things that matter, affecting the more difficult ones that you may have to get source on. And then if there's a sourcing team, or you've got support on your team, calling that out earlier rather than getting to the end game where in 30, 60 days, if you're not successful, you're going to have a problem because you're just starting it all over again.
It's too late
But
then. Yeah.
yep. So I think the good recruiters realize when, oh, this is going to be a big ask, and they start thinking about, what's my plan B and my plan C? Do I need additional resources or help? And being transparent with your customer, your hiring manager, or your recruiting team around when you feel like your load is too much, and how do you navigate? I think the more seasoned recruiters are able to navigate that.
Yeah. So basically, it's alignment, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And planning and
And planning.
anticipating
Right.
and
Right.
reading the tea leaves as to what's really
Yeah.
happening, and how are we going to make sure that we have a successful outcome.
Oh, that's bit me in the rear end quite a few times over my career. Yeah, I can get this done, and then, I'm gonna have some candidates for you in 4 weeks, and 4 weeks come around and I have no candidates. Of course, what the hiring manager thinks is I didn't do my job. Doesn't matter how long I worked for that job 4 weeks straight, no sleep, and it still didn't get anything. But they don't know that. They think I was on the beach, drinking Mai Tais.
Well, just one comment to
Understandably.
that. Yeah, and the advantage we have today is, like, there's more intelligence. When you
We
and I
know that,
started
right?
the business, we didn't have LinkedIn. We had to
We
just
didn't
get
have
on
the
the phone.
data. Yeah.
Right. Now we have the data, we have market intelligence, we can give us insight as to where the talent sits, we can do talent mapping, we can do a lot of things that we couldn't do before. And so part of this is thinking strategically around how we're going to solve the problem, and how can I make sure that what I'm doing is really productive and efficient. And the coaching I would give to, like, junior recruiters, talk to the seasoned recruiters that have done this well. Find people within your organization that seem to have figured it out. Everyone has strengths on your team. You've got some people who are really good at the applicant tracking or the CRM systems. Others are good at time management and the automation. Some are good at have a stronger network. And so rather than working in a vacuum, make sure you're leveraging the resources around you to help you solve the problem, so you can deliver on what you said you were going to do.
And that comes from necessity. So I I I want to add that as a consultant myself, I had my consulting practice for many years and worked with a lot of different companies. I very often get asked how to um, improve the skills of the entire team, especially as a trainer. And then they want me to teach these things to everybody where it's not necessary for everybody, right? Like, what I mean, just to get specific here, you've got 5 recruiters. One of them is extremely adept at um, plowing through 2,000 applicants in the ATS. All the jobs they fill literally through just applicants in the ATS. They don't need to learn how to source because they're not working in jobs that need sourcing. And you have another one who's really adept at LinkedIn, and they send out emails and they get great responses. They have learned how to work the system to get the high response rates. So they bring me in and they say, can you teach the first person how to do LinkedIn and teach the second person how to plow through the ATS? Well, yes, but they don't need that, right? It's not if the job requires LinkedIn, then maybe assign that job to the recruiter that already knows how to do that, or have them partner, because it's not necessary to teach all the skills to everybody necessarily.
Right.
That's why I created an instrument that tells me what the gaps are, in individuals so that I can actually work on those gaps, and only after diagnosing it with the manager of the team and say, okay, is this a recruiter? Yeah, they don't know how to use Google. Okay, do they need to know how to use Google? Are they going to
Right.
use? They might in the future. Okay, so we can teach that to them as a formative skill, but it's not necessary today, right? That
Right.
happens a lot where companies want to square peg everyone, even though some of those people by necessity have advanced their skills in other areas. So
So what we've done is so we had to do this a year or two ago when things were heated and everyone was losing recruiters because there's such a demand, and so we had to rebuild the team. And we actually asked for feedback from our team on like, what do you want us to start, stop, discontinue doing?
I stop continue. I
And
love that. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the feedback was folks want more training. We brought in more junior folks onto the team, and so we actually created like a couple TA days, and we continue to do that. And it's really asking for insight as to what are the areas where you feel like you've got gaps and want to learn from, and then we've taken people on the team that have that expertise, and they've done a presentation and created materials that can be used kind of as your playbook as to how do you get better at those types of things. So continue, when you think of like what's um, a skill set or a capability you're looking for really good recruiters, it's that ability to continue to learn. And we have like really senior people on our team that are probably the ones that are most interested in learning more, and like, especially now in the age of AI and what's emerging and the things that you can do more efficiently. If you're not staying on top of your game, if you're not investing and trying to learn and read and share that knowledge across your team, then you're in situations where people are navigating. And when you have those big asks from the business to figure it out, you're not able to deliver on it. We had one situation where we were going into a new market and the ask was pretty big. So we pull a pod in, and I think a lot of teams are doing that, where you pull in people with different types of experience, and it's almost like a sprint, and you get everyone working together, and you have different skill sets, and you're able to solve the problem quicker than doing it the traditional way of one-to-one, and at times that just doesn't work.
Yeah. Before we go, because I know you had a limited amount of time, and I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you very much for that. It's definitely very special to have you on here. But I did want to get to this one last topic that you said hiring manager expectations are high, and what I want to ask about that is, aren't they always? Or maybe another way to ask the question is, are they higher now than before, and what's changed?
Um, I don't. I think it depends on what industry you're in. So I spent most of my time in professional services. So our people are basically our product, and in order to generate revenue, you need more people because people are billable consultants. So what we're creating are solutions and solving
People
problems. And
generate profit. Yeah, right.
yeah, so we're in business to be successful. So there's a sense of urgency around getting the right people in the right roles to deliver on that. And then the other thing we're actually thinking about now is more about internal mobility, that making sure we've got a good platform, because another source of hires could be your internal talent that wants to move and develop in the
Mobility.
organization. So
Yep.
that's another part of it.
So our hiring manager expectations have always been high, but has something changed in general with are hiring managers today expecting more than they would have expected 5 years ago? Is there a difference because of what, technology, or more
Yeah,
availability of candidates?
I think there's pressure, especially part of it is like what's going on in the economy. Some industries are going through transformation, others are stressed. You've got high interest rates, so has impacted things. So organizations are managing their business pretty efficiently if they are not able to see the growth in revenue. So that puts more pressure for the roles that are being open. They're critical, and even companies that are having layoffs are actually hiring in more strategic areas. So
Laying off
they're
over here.
redeploying,
Yeah. Okay.
they're redeploying their assets. But so if they're making investments and they realize they don't have the talent to fill the open roles that they have, there's a sense of urgency about getting that skill set. And I think there's a common demeanor on the type of people we're looking for, which are, strong leadership skills, strong functional knowledge, or whatever it is, competencies and capabilities to navigate in the gray, agility, grit. So all the things you actually are looking for in a recruiter, you're oftentimes looking for in your performers for critical roles. And so if everyone's looking for similar type of talent, it means that those, top 20% performers are doing well and probably not looking for a job, or they have options. And so it just makes it more challenging to fill those critical positions.
But they have essentially, yes, hiring managers are getting more demanding, their expectations are higher, and it's because the risks are higher, it's because the stakes are higher.
Right,
So it's a combination of a change in the business environment where perhaps, not to point any fingers, but some companies might have just overhired because they had the money, right, and they could. So
right.
they just hired more than they needed, and now that's those days are probably gone, and companies are not doing the same kind of overhiring. Even companies that have never had layoffs are having layoffs, but still hiring, like you said. So that's where it's coming from. It's an economic shift that's leading to this increased expectation from hiring managers then.
Right. So I think the challenge is, how do you solve the problem? So is it a problem that can be solved with contingent labor to buy time to, before you can get the ideal candidate to come in the door? Is it something where you build, buy, or borrow? Do you partner with another firm that can solve that problem? So those that are in, like, recruiting and leadership positions within organizations are thinking about contingent workforce. How does that work into the equation? They're thinking of firms that haven't done anything offshore might be considering that to be more efficient in their dollars and to put the resources where they need it and build capabilities and expertise, not just in the location you're at, but somewhere else. So the complexity, I think, is happened because there's more options to solve the problem. So that's where the roles have become broader and more require someone with maybe a different skill set than what we're looking for before. But clearly there's a digital or technology component to a lot of jobs that maybe didn't exist before that has to be um, uh, is an aspect of the job that didn't exist. So you're looking for a skill set that might not be as available, or everyone's competing against it. So that's where understanding talent intelligence, the labor market, where that talent resides, is going to be helpful from a recruiting standpoint. And as you do that, it takes a little bit heat out of the room, so the hiring manager really understands what we're dealing with. And so how do you solve that problem? Bring the hiring manager into the conversation and make them a
Mm.
partner of, they're networked in the market too. Oftentimes you're dealing with leaders that have been in the industry for 25, 30 years. Turn them into brand ambassadors on LinkedIn. Teach them how to sell and motivate candidates to want to make the move. Make sure they're prepped on how to interview effectively, so when candidates come in the door, they have a great experience. So you're looking at acceptance rates. You're looking at when people are dropping off, why are they dropping off? And it's not all on recruiting. It could be something systemic within your organization, the way you're coming across.
But
So
we have to respond to that.
you have to
Yeah.
respond to. So that's where the roles are being, using that data and insights to direct how can you fix the gaps you have within your organization. Gives the hiring managers confidence that you're on your game and you're really, a talent advisor versus just focus on one narrow piece of it, which is just to identify the talent, and the interview process is going to happen on its own.
Well said. Well said. Uh, so before I let you go, I ask all of my guests two questions to close things out.
Okay.
The first of those is, most of people will actually be watching this or listening to it over the weekend, and so I want to give them something to chew on. So it's more of something to go away and contemplate and think about, rather than having you come up with a nice pithy, last words. Um, what would you want them? What one thing would you want them to start thinking about? A thought-provoking question to ask themselves.
Yeah. Are you asking your customers what they expect of you, and what would they like you to be doing that you're not doing? Would
Okay,
be one thing. So asking for direct feedback, because that will give you insights as to how they perceive you
I like
and
that.
what you should be working on from, like, a career development standpoint.
What do you
And
think they
so,
want you to do that you're not doing?
yeah, and the other part would be, what do you think you need to do to round out your skills to get better and be candid? I'm really good at this, but I'm not as good as this. And then the question is that really holding you back? And if it's holding you back, what do you need to do to fix it? And I think if you think
Mm.
about those two things around how people perceive you and how do you perceive yourself, that kind of might give you a roadmap as to what are the things you want to do and accomplish in 2024 to continually improve and get better at the game.
Okay, good deep thoughts there.
Yeah,
And the last question is, who should be our next guest?
Well, that's a great question. There's a lot of great people in talent acquisition. The things that I'm most interested in is how do you apply AI into recruiting? So anyone that kind of has a perspective of how to leverage intelligent automation to do our jobs more efficiently as a complement to the recruiting effort. We know that it's not going to replace what we do. There's still going to be a need for, a strategic consultant to advise. But I think all of us, as we get, learn and grow, having an understanding of what AI means to the recruiting industry and how we can leverage it appropriately. So anyone that can speak to that would be, I think, a good guest.
Okay. Do any names come to mind? I mean, they may not accept, but I can sure be persuasive.
I think a lot of the larger vendors are thinking about it. So,
okay.
I can think about it and send you some names. But
the
larger vendors, the larger vendors are thinking about, how can we make sure that we're still relevant, and are thinking about how to advance their relevancy and how to use it to get things done quicker, more effectively, and do it in a way that's not going to disrupt us in a bad way.
Okay, great. Well, that's
right.
I will dig into that one. I agree definitely on that. Thank you so much for being with us on this happy Friday. I hope for most of you the weather is going to be fantastic this weekend. And as usual, you will see me next Friday on Shally's Alley. Thank you, Paul, for being on with us today. Bye, everybody.
Shally, appreciate it.
Be kind to yourselves. Take care.